In mid-19th century America, the fastest trains chugged along at just 25 miles per hour, and no rail line ventured further west than the town of St. Joseph on the Kansas-Missouri border. But despite the railroad's limitations, men of vision and men of greed viewed it as the wonder that could unify and transform the far-flung nation. They envisioned an American continent linked from coast to coast by a road of iron, an avenue to economic glory and boundless opportunity. Engineering such a dream, however, seemed impossible. Between the established East and the new territories of the West sprawled nearly 2,000 miles of virgin wilderness and hostile terrain.
If you try to picture what North America was like in the 1840s and 50s, when the whole notion of the railroad began, you're basically talking about a vast emptiness beyond first the Mississippi and then the Missouri River. And beyond that, empty plains, a few scattered villages, several mountain ranges such as the Rockies and the Wasatch and the Sierra Nevadas. And basically that was the whole area that had to be crossed as the notion of the Transcontinental Railroad began. And it was clearly an impossibility back then.
As California's gold rush continued to turn the nation's attention west.
Tens of thousands of immigrants fighting their way across this terrible and empty terrain. And at the same point, these untold riches coming up out of the earth, out of the mountains, out of the streams of California and Nevada. And it really made the whole issue so much more urgent. Made it an inevitability.
The inevitability of a coast-to-coast railroad captured the imagination of American engineers, including an ambitious New Yorker, Theodore Judah. In 1854, he ventured west to build California's first set of tracks in the Sacramento Valley.
It was then that he began to have these grandiose dreams, these lunatic dreams about somehow being connected with the Transcontinental Railroad.
He knew it could be done, and he devoted every waking hour and every increment of his energy to convincing others that it was possible. He was known as Crazy Judah and called that to his face.
No one could curb Judah's passion for his transcontinental dream. But his work in California gave him first-hand knowledge of the daunting natural barrier that could crush it. The Sierra Nevada, which spans 400 miles and features peaks more than 14,000 feet high. Judah's challenge was to find a rail route through the mountainous terrain. Several expeditions yielded nothing. Then came a ray of hope.
When Judah got back to Sacramento, he had a letter from Doc Strong, who was a pharmacist up in Dutch Flat, a little town up in the mountains. Strong was interested in rebuilding the old road that ran through Dutch Flat on over Donner Summit to the Nevada desert beyond.
And Doc Strong told him about this single continuous divide up the North Fork of the American River. And this was the answer to his prayers.
In October 1860, Strong led Judah on a difficult two-day trek up the Sierra to Donner Summit, where the ill-fated party of settlers had become snowbound just 14 years earlier.
So there Judah and Doc Strong stood on the summit of Donner Pass with the ruts of the doomed Donner Party just at their feet, looking over that great gulf over the lake and off toward the east. And Judah realized that this was the magic route.
The magic route followed an immigrant trail virtually abandoned after the Donner tragedy.
Before there was a railroad here, it just would have been a hillside. The surveyors would have come along, driving stakes to show the workers where the railroad was supposed to be built. Then, maybe days, maybe weeks later, the construction men would come along, and they would start scraping out the ground. They would be cutting back into the hill and bringing fill out this way to create a nice level bed, maybe 14, maybe 16 feet wide, that they could build the railroad on.
Next, workers laid out the wooden cross ties that formed a base for the rails.
Then, finally, as the track layers come along, they've got a train with supplies, primarily the rail and the spikes. Out in front of that train, there'd be a flat car with the rail on it. Men would drag the rail, 24-foot, 30-foot lengths of rail off the end of the car.
One more drama remained. The moment the two rail lines were joined, A special ceremony was planned in which trains from each company would meet at the spot. Central Pacific President Leland Stanford set out for Utah from Sacramento, while the Union Pacific's Thomas Durant traveled from Omaha.
May 10th, 1869 was a beautiful, bright, sunny morning. The Union Pacific was coming from the east. The locomotive, the number 119, was pulling Thomas Durant and his entourage right here to the last spike site.
And Stanford and his party were coming from the west, being pulled by a Jupiter. And they met here.
The ceremony called for Stanford and Durant to drive not one, but 4 spikes, 2 gold, 1 silver, and a 4th made of gold, silver, and iron. A telegraph operator stood by to signal the news.
History tells us that the telegrapher, who sat about right here, his wire was connected to the telegraph line right up here, and the maul was wired as well as the last spike. So presumably, each time that the sledge hit the spike, it would send a pulse, which would be a signal that the last spike was driven.
When the rails were joined, the telegraph operator wired a message as understated as it was accurate. He tapped out D-O-N-E. 6 years after the first track had been laid, the dream of a nation united by rail was realized.
The Transcontinental Railroad connected the 2 halves of the country. Without the railroad, it would have been 2 separate countries.
Before the Transcontinental Railroad was built, it literally took 4 months to go from Omaha to the West Coast by wagon. And once the train was built, you could get a first-class ticket and be in San Francisco from Omaha in 4 to 5 days.
The most amazing thing about the Transcontinental Railroad is the people that envisioned it, the people that built it, the people that financed it. The people that did this are phenomenal. It's a work of giants, truly a work of giants.